Right now, many of you are probably disappointed in the United States' two-party political system. Some are blaming it on corruption in the system, or on corporate oligarchic influence in elections, or on, well, stupid voters. But here's the thing. Yes, there is corruption in our system. And yes, there is too much influence of the money from uber-wealthy humans and humans in politics. And yes, there are a lot of uninformed voters. But you don't need any of these things to enforce a two-party system. Get rid of all of them, and our two parties will likely remain. Here's what you need to ensure a two-party political system. Number 1, simple plurality rule elections. This is called Duverger's Law, which states that democracies that rely on simple plurality rule voting will tend toward a two-party system. Technically, you also need to be voting to fill a single person's office. There are alternate systems, some of which require voters to list candidates in order of preference before eliminating some of the least popular options. And others will, for example, proportionally assign representatives based on a popular vote. If you'd like some of the details, I highly recommend watching Politics and the Animal Kingdom, which explains how various systems work and how plurality rule elections tend to result in two-party systems. But to briefly summarize, voters who support less popular positions and candidates get tired of losing, so they decide they'd rather have someone who's kind of like them win. It's better to be represented a little than ignored entirely. So they start building coalitions together of people who are kind of similar to try to not get the leader who's much worse to them. This is why even though the US Constitution was written without political parties in mind, we had Federalists and Democratic Republicans by like President number 2. John Adams doesn't stand a chance, so who are you promoting? Even though Duverger's Law wasn't written down until the 1950s, voters intuitively understood the strategy they needed to win. Put another way, consider that around 120 million people tend to vote in US presidential elections, and the result requires a compromise between those 120 million people. People whose lives are vastly different from yours and mine in ways we haven't imagined. No one is coming out of a 120 million person compromise on a single leader completely satisfied with the result. That doesn't mean that the only options are varying degrees of evil either. Compromise is just the nature of living with other people in a society. What makes plurality rule voting different from alternative systems is when that compromise occurs in relation to the act of voting. For example, if you just list candidates in order of preference and then let an algorithm take care of the compromising part, we don't have to worry about it. But our system is much simpler, so it means we need to plan our compromise with 120 million other Americans before our vote. So how do we do that? Well, 120 million is a lot of people. So let's start simply by imagining them on a spectrum from liberal to conservative. Now, as with most variables, assessing political opinion in this way tends to look like a bell curve. Most people are in the middle, relatively few people are at the extremes. This can help explain why there are quite a few issues that the average Democrat and Republican agree on. So as politicians start to build coalitions of supporters, they often frame their arguments for those people in the middle. This means they'll often express their opinions differently than I or a lot of other voters would have, specifically to try to convince people who we've never met and whose lives and opinions we don't fully understand. This also means it will always be possible for someone to frame your choice as a lesser of two evils. Wherever your vantage point on this curve, whatever your opinion is, you'll look and see a person who disagrees with you a little bit, and then a person who disagrees with you more in the same direction. Unless you just happen to be viewing from the unlikely position in between the two. Unfortunately, it also means that if you just vote for the person you like best, it can backfire, making it more likely your elected leader is less like you. For example, if a candidate starts to gain support just from people at one extreme end, it makes it less likely that any candidate from their side of the spectrum will win. This is called the spoiler effect, and it's essentially a feature of just plurality rule voting. Anticipating support for other candidates based on polls and then voting as a coalition is not a stupid sheeple activity. If you care about the outcome, it's the smart, strategic action that's required of us based on the rules of the game. To do otherwise is to mistake chess for checkers. These are different games with different rules and different strategies. So here's one recommendation. Visit isidewith.com and take their quiz. They'll tally your results and tell you how much the people running for president agree with you. I recommend on election day voting for a candidate you generally agree with who also has a broad coalition of support. Now, these coalitions may shift between now and election day, but voting in support of a coalition on that day is still the strategy required of us by our system if we want to best affect the outcome. Like former New York City Mayor Ed Koch said, "If you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 out of 12 issues, see a psychiatrist." Voting for someone who agrees with you on most issues is not a lesser evil. If you care about political outcomes, like what policies are enacted, what rights people have, and what wars are started, it's probably a massive good. To do otherwise is to mistake chess for checkers. I'm gonna play a game of checkers. We're on the same page that there's more that matters besides just positions on issues, right? Like, impulse control, or the ability to sustain attention, or a general interest in learning about the world, not starting a nuclear war, that sort of thing.